Well, hello, it's Stephanie and welcome to another video. We're making a flower press book today. So here's the things that you're going to need. So here are my materials. I have my corrugated cardboard, some chipboard for the covers, scrapbook paper we're not going to use, my cotton straps, and my book fabric, which is cotton fabric that I have ironed interfacing on. And that's it. It works really well as a book fabric. So I don't need the chipboard and the cotton fabric. That's for the cover. The inside, or the signature, it's just one signature that we're working on, is going to be made out of corrugated cardboard. You want it to be the thick kind because when you put the book together, you want it to have pressure on the flowers that either you're pressing or that you're storing. So I have about 8 pieces of corrugated cardboard that I cut down from a box. And we're going to start by gluing these cotton strips to create a sort of spine for each. And we're going to make 4 booklets of 2. So I'm using a decoupage gel to glue it down. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have used that decoupage gel because it wasn't strong enough. I would say use a tacky glue or a Mod Podge, something that you know is going to really hold down that fabric and dry well. I ended up going back over it with PVA glue, which is also a good choice. This is woven fabric, so I'm not that worried about the glue not holding it because the glue will seep through, and it just needs to fold in half. And I thought about using paper, but I didn't want the connections to tear after a while. And I didn't want to use any plastic tape, so I thought that these fabric strips would be the way to go. If you have a canvas book tape, that would be really good too, but I don't have any. And I'm really trying hard to just use what I have in my crafting projects because I have an overflowing craft room. I don't know how many of you can sympathize with that, but I'm trying really hard not to buy any more. So it's the same process for all 8 pieces. We're just going to attach these pieces 2 by 2 with some cotton fabric, and then we'll have to go and let those dry before we move on. And there's the last one. And then after they're dry, we're going to cut off the ends. We don't really need them. You could glue them over, but I think that would, actually I think that might interfere with how the book closes and opens. So I just cut off the extra. The reason why I didn't cut them to fit is because I'm not really good at that. And I wanted to make sure that they went right to the ends because this is the only hinge that, these are the only hinges that our book has. And so we want to make sure that they fit well. So you can kind of see there that I left too much space in between those 2 pieces of cardboard, which means they were kind of wonky when you folded them together. So I actually went back and re-glued those so that they were flush with each other before I glued down the strip, and that was much better. After we cut off the ends of all these little booklets, we're going to start binding them in the opposite direction because we're making an accordion style book. So what you're going to do is you take 2 of those two booklets. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to turn them over so that they're upside down. And then the part that is not attached to a piece of cloth, that's where we're going to put our next hinge. So whatever glue you're using, you're going to hinge up just that center piece right there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to keep adding our little booklets of 2 together so that we can make one large accordion booklet. So after I glue this together, I'm going to push it down, and then at the very end where there's nothing attached to that cardboard, I'm going to attach another 2 pieces of cardboard to make my book even longer. This has to be done with the book laying flat because the glue isn't dry enough and it's not holding the strips together. So if you don't have a really long table, I have a really long table in my room, but if you don't have a really long table, you might have to wait for hinges to dry in between before you move on to the next one. So what you'll see is it'll speed up in a second here, is I just push it down and then start gluing another piece to the very end. You want a hinge on the opposite side where there's no hinge. And this is going to make our book fold back and forth in a accordion or a concertina, depending on where you're from. That's how you say it. And we're going to do this until we have all 8 pieces joined together in one long strip. And then in a little bit, you'll see how it works, because I don't think I'm explaining it that well. But it's really cool because you can open it from the front, but then you can flip over the book and open it again, so you have twice as much space for pressing flowers. So I'm just going to finish pasting on these pieces. I want to make sure that they're stuck really well, and then you're going to slide it on down and you're going to attach the next piece, and then you're going to do this until all 8 pieces are used. Now you can make this book longer or shorter depending on what you need. You just need more strips and more cardboard. So here's my chipboard. These are going to be my covers. They're only about 1 millimeter. They're not very thick because we're going to be gluing them to the corrugated cardboard, so you don't have to use anything too thick. And my book cloth here is just homemade book cloth. I used lightweight interfacing, and I just ironed it to the back of some fabric, and it's been washed, which is why it looks like that. And that is the book cloth. So you only need an inch around, well, you probably don't even need that much, but I like to leave an inch. So I'm using an inch around each end, each side of the cover piece. And I'm going to cut it. My rotary cutter's broken, so I have to use scissors. And I actually don't do a bad job, so that's why you get to see it in fast forward, because I'm pretty proud of my straight cutting. I'm going to cut off a little bit of the extra there because it's not covered by interfacing, and then I'm going to glue down that chipboard to the cloth. And I'm going to use that gel because it doesn't have to be the strongest hold it to your book cover. You just want to make sure that it's something that's going to just stick it to the board. When we go to fold over the edges, you'll want to use a stronger glue because there'll be some pulling and tugging to make sure that everything's nice and tight over the front cover. But for this, it can just be whatever cheap glue you have. And so I just use a little bit of decoupage gel because it's on my desk all the time. And then we'll stick it to the center. We want to be careful because when you go to turn the corners, if it's not centered, the corners will be a little off center, which isn't a big deal, but just in case. So I'm using a brayer to make sure that my fabric has good contact with the chipboard. It's not necessary. I saw it and thought it would be fun to use. But usually I just use my hands and make sure that it's nice and smooth. And then you want to let that dry before you move on to turning over the corners, because you want to make sure it's nice and stuck. And then we're going to do the same for a second cover. And now we're going to cover our covers, and I'm going to show you a little trick that I use to make sure that I'm cutting the right angles. In order to get a nice mitered corner on my book covers, I like to fold up the corners, and then I get a little crease there. And I cut just above that crease so that I have a little space between the corner and the edge of the fabric. And then I find that that usually, unless I really mess up, gives me a nice angle and gives me a nice mitered corner, so a nice 45-degree angle in the corners of my cover. And it hasn't failed me yet. So I just like to fold it up, and I don't know if I can see it, the little line there, and I just cut right along that line, and that is the angle that you need in order to get a nice corner when you fold your fabric over. I'm using a really strong glue for this because I do tug at the fabric to make sure that it's nice and tight over the front so that there's no wrinkles in your cover. And so you want to make sure, at least I do, I want to have a really strong glue to hold my sides while I'm doing all that pulling. And because I'm not a patient crafter, I use some clips to hold my fabric down while I'm waiting for it to sort of tack up. When I am covering a book cover, I like to do the opposite sides. So I do the long sides first, one long side and then the opposite, so that I can pull it nice and tight, so that, like I said, there's no wrinkles or no space on the front. You want it to be nice and tight. And then I do the ends because I find the shorter ends easier to flip those little corners in so that you don't have a really pointy corner, so that I don't have a really pointy corner. What I like to do is I like to push that little corner in before I fold it up, and then that stops me from having really sharp corners. If you like really sharp corners, then go for it. I don't. They always hurt me and I get poked. So I like to make sure that my corners are all tucked in. And it's just a lot easier to do it on the shorter side. And you're going to need to tug if you cut off the corners the way that I do, because it just fits. So I do a lot of tugging. And then I put some clips there so that I don't have to hold it right in the corners. And then we're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. Make sure it's nice and taut and that those corners are poked in. And then we'll glue it down. I'll glue it down with some really strong glue. And I'm only going to show you one cover because the second cover is the exact same. So you're going to do this twice so that you have two nice identical covers. And then I'm going to clip it up. And again, you're going to want to make sure that this is really dry before we go on, because we're going to be gluing it down. Once the covers are fully dry, then I can move on to actually putting the whole thing together. So here are my two pieces. I have the accordion book, which opens, and then flip it over and it opens on the other side, which doubles your space for flowers, and my two covers. And the reason why it opens that way is because we did those hinges in an accordion style. And it's, I think, very useful for this type of book. To glue on our covers, I'm going to use another strong glue. This is by Stamperia, and it's not bad, but any PVA glue will work. That's polyvinyl acetate. And there's lots of different PVA glues. Mod Podge is a type of PVA glue, as is tacky glue. So any sort of strong white glue is probably a PVA glue, and that's going to have a really good bond for the chipboard and the cardboard. So I've glued the first cover on, and now to let it dry, I'm going to put some weight on it so that it gets nice contact, and then wait till it dries. And once it's dry, we'll do the same thing to the other. I'm using ribbon to close my flower press book. There's lots of different ideas that I had for closing it, but I didn't want to have to buy anything else because I have a crowded craft room and I'm trying to use what I have. So I had this unbleached ribbon, It's actually really nice. It's woven in a V pattern. And so I glued it along the bottom. I thought it would be really pretty to tie a couple of bows on the top in order to close it. And I know that tying it will give me control over how tight I close the book, because if I close it tighter, then there's going to be more pressure if I'm actually pressing books, or I don't have to have it as tight if I'm just storing pressed flowers in it. So I went with the ribbon route. But there's some great things that you can do. Fabric that uses Velcro, that would be really cool. You could use belt buckles if you're into leather working and you want to use some hardware. I think that that would be really pretty. If you have any other ideas about how to close up this book, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. And so because I thought it would go with my fabric, which I forget what this is called, when you have little flowers, like, is it ditzy or... I forget. It has a name. If you know that too, let me know. I wanted to put a couple of bows on it because I thought that would be really cute. And then I actually didn't decorate it too much because I found that the fabric I was using was pretty and I didn't want to cover it up. This fabric was from, I don't know if you're from Canada, it was from Fabricland. They did this run on all these sort of vintage patterns, and this was one of them. So for my decoration, I took this canvas tag and I stamped some flowers on it, and I put a little bumblebee seal on it, and then I wrote flowers on it. And I'm going to attach it to the ribbon using, my favorite safety pins, these little light bulb looking safety pins. I think they're so cute. I got those at, Amazon. They were really cheap because I had bought the Tim Holtz brand where you get like 16 for $29 or something. And then these I got 150 for $6. So that was great. That ribbon is really, really, really clean, and I've grunged up my fabric, so I'm going to grunge up my ribbon. All I'm using is just a sponge dauber and some distress ink. I'm using Vintage Photo, which is my favorite distress ink for grunging up stuff. And so I just grunge it up a little bit so that it matches. And then that's it. That's the whole book. How I would use this book is a little different than somebody who might want to use it for pressing flowers. I press my flowers in the microwave. I learned how to do that just recently, and it's a lot of fun. So for storing my dried and pressed flowers, I'm just going to put down some wax paper because this is the best way to store them. And then I'm going to put my already dried leaves and flowers between the wax paper. And that pressure from the book is going to keep them nice and flat, and the wax paper is going to keep them protected from moisture. If you wanted to use this book to press flowers, you could. You would just need to change the wax paper to blotting paper, or tracing paper works really well, and then put your fresh flowers in and press them for, I think it's a couple months before you open it up again. Make sure that it's closed nice and tight. And that would be how you use it. And I have some close-up pictures here at the end. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. The top box is a video of mine that you might be interested in, and the bottom is to subscribe. Have a great day.